Hello everybody, and welcome to the lecture on free will. This is one of my favorite topics. Indeed, it is one of the topics that first got me interested in philosophy. I will try to keep the lecture fairly short, and I intend to supplement with some additional video links that also help explain the material. My lecture will supplement these links and spend a good deal of time with terminology. The summary of key terms and concepts at the end of the module will also be especially useful. Remember, the readings themselves do not necessarily cover everything. Otherwise, you would be reading a good deal more, and also there would be a much more expensive textbook for the course. The readings and lectures and the additional material all work together to give you the information that you need. I try to give you the most important terms and concepts at the end of each module, though, of course, such notes cannot contain everything that is important. First, some definitions. Free will. This is the ability to freely decide to take an action. There are two mutually exclusive ways to understand what free will means. The two theories we will be looking at in this module hold the could have done otherwise conception of free will. In order to be free regarding some choice, it must be the case that, given the exact same physical circumstances, and this means the same right down to the last subatomic particle, one could have done otherwise. So assume that you decided to have pizza for breakfast today. This view of free will holds that, in order for that to have been a free choice, it must be possible that you, with your brain and the entire universe in the exact same state, could have chosen not to have pizza for breakfast. There's another conception of free will, which I call the psychological desire version, which says that to be free it merely has to be the case that you could have done otherwise if you had wanted to or desired to do otherwise. Under this view, it could be the case that given your brain state and the state of the rest of the universe, that you would always choose to do the same thing, say have pizza for breakfast. But you are considered free if, had you wanted to not have pizza, you could have done so. Having such a different desire, though, means that there is something different about your brain. So given any particular brain state and inputs from the world, you might always do the same thing. Libertarianism. In metaphysics, this is the belief that we have free will over at least some of our actions. We are talking about the metaphysical theory about free will, not the political theory of governance. Libertarians believe in the could have done otherwise conception of free will. Libertarians also believe that, at least for some of our actions, we could have in fact done otherwise. In other words, they accept the could have done otherwise conception of free will and assert that it holds true in at least some real-world circumstances. They do not need to believe that every choice is free. Next up is hard determinism. Hard determinists agree with libertarians about the definition of free will. They say that in order to be free regarding some action, it must be the case that we could have done otherwise. Hard determinists differ from libertarians in that they do not believe that this is ever possible. So they deny that free will exists. There is also a view which we will discuss in the next module called soft determinism or compatibilism. They disagree with the definition of free will. They hold that to be free regarding some act, it need not be the case that we could have done otherwise given the exact same physical conditions, but rather only that if we wanted to do otherwise we could have. Soft determinists or compatibilists agree with hard determinists that it is impossible for us to choose to do otherwise. They therefore believe that free will is compatible with determinism, or to put it another way, that determinism does not imply that free will does not exist. This is why they are called compatibilists or soft determinists. We will not say much more about compatibilists until the next module. Before moving on, we should also note the difference between randomness and unpredictability, or being indeterminate. Something which is random has no determinate cause. We often say things like flipping a coin or spinning a roulette wheel are random, but they are not. If you set the coin on your thumb in exactly the same way, if you flip it with exactly the right force and the right angle, and all the environmental conditions are the same, including what it lands on, heat, air pressure, wind, and so forth, it will always land exactly the same way. The reason why dice and roulette wheels work for games of chance, why we call them random in colloquial, though not a literal sense, is because they are unpredictable. There are so many factors affecting the spin of a roulette wheel, and such a spin is so sensitive to small changes in initial conditions that it is practically impossible to predict the outcome. It is not, however, a literal impossibility. Depending on the complexity and number of variables, the odds of some such outcomes can be manipulated with practice. People can, for example, practice flipping a coin. Practice flipping it the same way each time so that they have a much higher probability of it coming up a particular way. So never bet your paycheck on a coin flip. Rolling dice or spinning a roulette wheel, however, is much more sensitive to subtle initial conditions. Is anything truly random? Some theories of quantum physics allow that some events are truly random at the subatomic level. So, something that is merely unpredictable is caused. It is just impossible or practically difficult to calculate what the results will be. Some such systems may be impossible to calculate given current technology, and others may simply be practically impossible or require so much measurement and time that we cannot reasonably do so. Examples of this are rolling dice, spinning a roulette wheel, picking lottery numbers out of a hopper, and so forth. So, it seems to most of us as if we have free will. That is to say that most people believe that, regarding at least some things, people have the ability to freely make a choice. Why would hard determinists deny this? To see why, we will discuss three problems with free will. The first I will call the physical problem of free will. The second I will call the psychological problem of free will. And the third is known as the Determinism-Indeterminism dilemma. So, imagine yourself making some decision, any decision. Your body contains a brain, and this is the source of our decision making. The brain, in turn, is made out of neurons, which are cells. Cells are made up of molecules, and molecules are collections of atoms. And if we go in further, atoms are composed of subatomic particles, but we will set aside the strange world of quantum physics for the moment. Our determinists point out that atoms have no choice about how they behave. They behave entirely according to the laws of physics. They have no free will. Since molecules are made up entirely of atoms, they too have no choice about how they behave. They behave as determined by the laws of physics. Likewise, cells are made up entirely of molecules, so cells too have no room for free choice or free will. They behave exactly as the molecules that make them up behave. There's nothing else to a cell. Our brains and bodies are nothing but collections of these cells. Since what cells do is entirely determined by what molecules do, and what molecules do is entirely determined by what the atoms that make them up do, we too have no room for free will. This is the physical problem of free will. Physics simply doesn't seem to allow for it. One way to see this is with the thought experiment known as Laplace's demon. I will call it instead Laplace's computer. Imagine a computer that is programmed with all of the laws of physics. It is a perfect physics simulator. Imagine now that it is programmed with the initial conditions of the universe. Every bit of relevant data is entered. So, for example, it is programmed with the position of every single atom in the universe, the energy of these atoms, their motion, and so forth. Given its perfect understanding of physics and unlimited computing power, it could calculate where every single atom would be 10 minutes from now, or 10 years from now, or 100 years from now. This means that it could predict exactly what you or anybody else would be doing, saying, or thinking 10 years from now, or 100 years from now. It could predict anything in the universe it was simulating. Remember that this is a thought experiment. The problem for free will doesn't depend upon actually being able to make such a computer. The problem arises from the theoretical possibility of predicting all future configurations of all atoms from all present configuration of atoms, given their states at some time, and all of the laws of physics. Setting aside the possibility of quantum indeterminacy, there seems to be nothing stopping the possibility of such prediction. We do this sort of thing all the time with simple systems. The only thing that seems to interfere is computing power, possible imperfections in our understanding of physics, imperfection with starting data that we might enter, and so forth. We can also look at this problem of free will psychologically. Suppose that you reach a decision to act. This decision was caused by certain beliefs and desires. If that is true, then given all and only those same thoughts and beliefs at the same strength and so forth, you could not have reached any other decision. So suppose that you desire food. You believe that pizza will make you less hungry. Out of all the foods in your refrigerator, you also believe that eating it will be less work than cooking and that it will taste good. You might have some other beliefs as well, such as if you do not eat the pizza soon, it will go bad and be wasted. You therefore decide to eat it. Those beliefs caused your decision. If the decision was caused, it was not free in the sense of could have done otherwise. Given those same thoughts, the same values, you could not have done otherwise. Well, you might say, but what if I decided not to eat it? Well, if you decided not to eat it, then it doesn't seem like you could have exactly the same beliefs and desires at exactly the same strength. Maybe your desire was different. Maybe you were more thirsty than hungry and so decided to have a soda. Or maybe you believed that the pizza belonged to your roommate. Or maybe you lacked the belief that the pizza is still fresh enough to eat. Those new beliefs and desires could result in a decision not to eat the pizza. But given the same beliefs and desires, it seems as if you would have made the same decision. So again, if free will means could have done otherwise, it seems that you are not free. But maybe you think that your decision somehow has a random element. This leads us to what might be the biggest problem for the existence of free will, which is known as the Determinism-Indeterminism dilemma. Pick an action, any action, and it can either be determined or undetermined. If the action is determined, then you could not have done otherwise. So if that is our definition of free will, then that action cannot be free. So suppose instead that the action is undetermined. While an undetermined action could have been otherwise, it can only have been otherwise randomly. That is to say that an undetermined action is random within the bounds of its indeterminacy. But acting randomly is not choosing to act. That is to say, random actions are not the same thing as free actions. Imagine if all of your actions were decided by somebody rolling dice that were truly random as opposed to just unpredictable. You would hardly say that your actions were free. But actions are either determined or not determined, P or not P. Both possibilities mean that there's no room for free choice. Determinism means that you could not have done otherwise, and randomness leaves you no room for choice either. Therefore, the argument concludes that if by free will we mean could have done otherwise, it cannot exist. Now, libertarians try to say that the choices are not just determinism or indeterminism, not just P or not P. They claim that there is a third option, free choice. In other words, they claim that the determinism-indeterminism dilemma is a false dilemma. The issue, though, is to explain what that could possibly mean. If one is going to say that there is some third possibility, that third possibility needs to be explained. But it seems like explanations tend to resolve in determinism or indeterminism. That is to say, free will is either described as acting because of reasons, in which case the act is determined, or acting because of some indeterministic cause, in which case the act is random and not free. It is not clear how any combination of determined effects and undetermined effects could result in free will if free will means could have done otherwise. Note that hard determinists do not claim that it doesn't feel as if we are free. We have a tendency to think of ourselves as free when making our decisions. Also, we can't calculate what we will do ourselves ahead of time. That is to say that we ourselves do not have any practical way to crunch all the physics and take a shortcut to our decisions. It therefore makes sense to weigh our possibilities and reason about what we will do. Free will is important because it has a number of moral implications. It is generally taken that in order to be morally responsible for some act, we need to have chosen this act. If I punch somebody because I didn't like that person's smug face, I would be morally blameworthy. If, on the other hand, I punched somebody because I was standing in a puddle and a jolt of electricity caused my arm to fly up and hit that person in the face, I would not be held morally responsible. I had no choice in the matter. But hard determinists say that all of our actions are like the second case. There's never really a free choice. This, of course, isn't an argument that free will must exist, but rather an argument about the implications of free will not existing. It is also important to note that there is a difference between being morally responsible and punishment. A hard determinist can hold that it still makes sense to punish people for what they do, because if we did not, that would be another factor that altered people's behavior. If we did not punish theft, we would have more theft. Therefore, we punish because humans are deterministic. We are trying to change people's behavior. We do not punish because of moral responsibility. Some hard determinists argue that this point of view can make us more grateful for our own circumstances and more sympathetic to the plights of others. We realize that if our brains and circumstances were just like that of somebody else, we would behave in the same way. We are only lucky that we are not in this situation. We also have a question of what to call free will deniers that believe that elements of the world are indeterministic. As we saw, true randomness does not mean that free will exists, and many modern interpretations of quantum mechanics hold that there is such randomness. Free will deniers also tend to conform their views very much to science. There isn't a great term for this position. Oftentimes we might just call them determinists because they believe that the small amounts of randomness at the quantum level, or even large amounts of randomness, doesn't allow for free will. But this isn't quite right because not everything in the universe is determined. For lack of a better term, we can call them hard indeterminists. So, in giving this term, I will be using the following definition. A hard indeterminist is somebody who believes that there is no free will, even though they believe that there may be truly random events. So what do libertarians say? Libertarians, as mentioned, claim that the determinism-indeterminism dilemma is a false dilemma. There are some defenses or theories of libertarianism, but they are limited. Campbell and Nozick, for example, have a view of free will that works like this. Some of our decisions are determined by our beliefs, desires, and habits. Sometimes, however, our minds are in an indeterminate state, maybe because of quantum effects. So maybe at some point in our lives we are deciding whether or not to lie. Maybe we are pulled over by the police, and we believe that we can get out of a ticket if we say that our wife is in the hospital having a baby. So we are deciding whether we want to lie or not. But this decision begins to build our character and our habits. So the next time we are in a situation where we decide whether or not to lie based on our past beliefs, desires, habits, and behaviors, this might be determined. We might lie even if our brains are not in one of those rare quantum states. The argument is, however, that we are still morally responsible because we built our character out of our past decisions that were free. So this is a really clever attempt at a solution, but as a solution it has at least two problems. First, it rests on the idea that macro items can be in indeterminate states just like quantum items, and this doesn't seem to be something that we have ever observed under non-supercold conditions present in some laboratories. Second, even if we assume that our brains can have such states, we are still left with the problem that a thing which is indeterminate seems to be random. That is not the same thing as free will. Suppose that you are deciding whether to lie or not. Suppose your brain can be and is in an indeterminate quantum state. This means that given the exact same conditions, sometimes you will lie and sometimes you will not lie. If we rewound time, you might lie one time and not lie another. But your so-called decision to lie is not based on anything. It is not caused by any beliefs you have. It is not caused by any values you have. It is unclear, therefore, how any of this in any way resembles free will, or how it can be used to build upon to build free will. How are you morally responsible for an act that was random, when, given that you, the exact same person with the exact same beliefs, if the moment in time were played out again, might choose differently? There are philosophers that try to defend this incompatibilist version of free will. It is impossible to cover all of the literature here, but it should be clear that there are some real and maybe insurmountable difficulties facing this view. Does this mean that free will does not exist? Not necessarily, because we have yet to talk about compatibilist views of free will. We will be covering compatibilism, or soft determinism, in the next module. The previous problems, remember, were with libertarianism, which holds that free will and determinism are incompatible. Before the next module, spend some time considering why a philosopher might think that free will can exist, even if all of our actions are determined. And that about wraps it up for this lecture. Until next time.